Good wishes to all of you. Disaster management, the syllabus for UPSC, and the first chapter here is overview. Now we are hearing it on a audio format. Contents of this chapter was introduction, definition of disaster management, types and levels of disasters, global and Indian scenario, hazard profile of India, climate change, poverty and disaster vulnerability, cause and effect of disasters, what is disaster management, conclusion. Introduction. There are no natural disasters, but we have natural hazards like cyclones, floods, landslides, etc. A disaster happens when hazards cause damage, disruption, and casualties to people, their possessions, and their environment. For example, irrespective of the intensity of an earthquake is in an uninhabited desert, it cannot be considered a disaster. An earthquake is considered disastrous only when it affects people, their properties, and activities. India's geoclimatic conditions, as well as its high degree of socio-economic vulnerability, makes it one of the most disaster-prone countries in the world. A disaster is an extreme disruption of the functioning of a society that causes widespread human, material, or environmental losses. Disasters are classified as natural disasters or human-made disasters. Disasters caused by droughts, volcanoes, and earthquakes are generally considered natural disasters. Disasters caused by direct result of human activities like civil war, industrial accidents, and environmental pollutions are classified as human-made or human-induced disasters. Definition of disaster. The Disaster Management Act 2005 defines a disaster as a catastrophe, calamity, or grave occurrence in any area arising from natural or man-made causes or by accident which results in substantial loss of life or human suffering and destruction of property or damage to the environment, and is of such a nature as to be beyond the coping capacity of the community of the affected area. The United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction defines disaster as a serious disruption of the functioning of a community or a society involving widespread human, material, economic, or environmental losses and impacts, which exceeds the ability of the affected community or society to cope using its own resources. Types and levels of disasters. Disasters are not new to mankind. They have been the constant, though inconvenient compassions of human beings since time immemorial. Right from the dawn of civilization, natural disasters were an integral part of human history. The rise and fall of the Indus Valley civilization is a testimony to this. Broadly, natural disasters can be classified under four categories: atmospheric, terrestrial, aquatic, biological. Atmospheric: blizzards, thunderstorms, lightning, tornadoes, tropical cyclone, drought, hailstorm, frost, heat wave or loo, cold waves, etc. Terrestrial: earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, landslides, avalanches, subsidence, soil erosion. Aquatic: floods, tidal waves, ocean currents, storm surge, tsunami. Biological: plants and animals as colonizers, locusts, etc. Insects, infestation, fungal, bacteria, and viral diseases such as bird flu, dengue, etc. We can say COVID as well also. The High-Powered Committee on Disaster Management consisted in 1999 has also identified 31 disasters categorized into 5 major subgroups: water and climate related disasters, floods and drainage management, tornadoes and hurricanes, cloudburst, snow avalanches, sea erosion, cyclones, hailstorm, heat wave and cold wave, droughts, thunder and lightning. Geologically related disasters: landslides and mudflows, earthquakes, dam failures, dam bursts, minor fires. Chemical, industrial, and nuclear related disasters. Chemical and industrial disasters, nuclear disasters. Accident related disasters. Forest fires, urban fires, mine flooding, oil spill, major building collapse, serial bomb blast, festival related disasters, electrical disasters and fires, air, road and rail accidents, boat capsizing, village fire. Biologically related disasters. Biological disasters and epidemics, pest attacks, cattle epidemics, food poisoning. Levels of disasters. The disaster management and its planning at various times must take into account the vulnerability of disaster affected area and the capacity of the authorities to deal with the situation. Using this approach, the High Powered Committee on Disaster Management, in its report of 2001, categorized the disaster situations into three levels: L1, L2, and L3. Level 1, L1, the level of disaster that can be managed within the capabilities and resources at the district level. However, the state authorities will remain in readiness to provide assistance if needed. Level 2, L2. This signifies the disasters situations that require assistance and active mobilization of resources at the state level and deployment of state level agencies for disaster management. The central agencies must remain vigilant for immediate deployment if required by the state. Level L3. This corresponds to a nearly catastrophic situation or a very large scale disaster that overwhelms the state and district authorities. Disasters, global and Indian scenario. Natural or human made disasters are common throughout the world. Disasters continue to occur without warning and are perceived to be on the increase in their magnitude, complexity, frequency, and economic impact. Hazards pose threats to people and assume serious proportions in underdeveloped countries with dense populations. During the second half of the 20th century, more than 200 major natural disasters occurred in different parts of the world and claimed the lives of around 1.4 million people. Losses due to natural disasters are 20 times greater percent of GDP in developing countries than in industrialized ones. Asia tops the list of casualties due to natural disasters. Top 10 countries by total death toll. Top 10 countries by total death toll 2018. Country and total death toll. Indonesia 4535, India 1388, Guatemala 427, Japan 419, China 341, Nigeria 300, United States of America 298, Pakistan 240, Korea DPR 237, Philippines 221. Source: EMDAT International Disasters Database. Indian scenario. India, due to its geoclimatic and socio-economic conditions, is prone to various disasters. During the last 30 years time span, the country has been hit by 431 major disasters, resulting in enormous loss of life and property. According to Prevention Web, a knowledge platform for disasters risk reduction statistics, 1,43,039 people were killed and about 150 crore were affected by various disasters in the country during these 3 decades. The disasters caused huge loss to property and other infrastructure costing more than US $4,800 crore. Floods, earthquakes, cyclones, hailstorms, etc. are the most frequently occurring disasters in India. Apart from heat wave, cold waves and heavy winds affecting some areas of the country. Rise in temperature from cities to urban heat islands. Vulnerability profile of India. India has been vulnerable in varying degrees to a large number of natural as well as human-made disasters on account of its unique geoclimatic and socio-economic conditions. India is highly vulnerable to floods, droughts, cyclones, earthquakes, landslides, avalanches, and forest fires. Out of the 36 states and union territories in the country, 27 of them are disaster prone. Almost 58.6% of the landmass is prone to earthquakes of moderate to very high intensity. Over 40 million hectares, 12% of land are prone to floods and river erosion. Of the 7,516 kilometers long coastline, close to 5,700 kilometers is prone to cyclones and tsunamis. 68% of the cultivatable area is vulnerable to drought, and hilly areas are at risk from landslides and avalanches. In the context of human vulnerability to disasters, the economically and socially weaker segments of the population are the ones that are most seriously affected. Within the vulnerable groups, women rendered destitute, children orphaned, and differently abled persons are exposed to higher risks on accounts of disasters. Hazard profile of India. India is one of the 10 worst disasters prone countries of the world. Due to its unique geographical and geological conditions, the country is highly vulnerable to natural disasters. Of the five distinct regions of the country, that is Himalaya region, the alluvial plains, the hilly part of the peninsula, and the coastal zone, each have their own specific problems. Himalaya region is prone to disasters like earthquakes and landslides. The plains are affected by floods almost every year. The arid parts of the country are affected by droughts and famine, while the coastal zone is susceptible to cyclones and storms. The collision of Indian plate with the Eurasian plate and the constant rise of the Himalayas with plates still in motion makes the entire region vulnerable to tremors, landslides, and the floodplains along the Himalayas susceptible for high intensity earthquakes, with most regions lying in seismic zone 4. Though peninsular India is considered to be the most stable portion of India, occasional earthquakes in the region show that geotectonic movements are still going on within its depths. The major rivers flowing from the Himalayas bring huge quantities of unconsolidated sediments with them, resulting in channel siltation and frequent floods, especially in the plains of Uttar Pradesh and Bihar. Its tropical location makes India naturally susceptible to tropical cyclones, and the monsoon with huge temporal and spatial variations bring deluge in some parts of India, while rain shadow regions suffers from drought, particularly the western part of the country. Rajasthan, Gujarat, and some parts of Maharashtra are hit by drought frequently. If monsoon fails, droughts occur in other parts of the country too. The geotectonic movements going on in the ocean floor make the coastal region prone to tsunamis. Along with the natural factors discussed, various human made factors like man induced climate change, population increase, deforestation, unsustainable agriculture practices, unplanned urbanization, construction of large dams on river channels, etc., are also responsible for accelerated impact and increase in frequency of disasters in the country. Climate change. Climate change is evident from the increase in the global average air and ocean temperatures, extreme rainfall, widespread melting of snow and ice storm surges, coastal flooding, and rising global mean sea level, as recorded in the fourth assessment report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change (IPCC). Climate change is expected to increase the frequency and intensity of current extreme weather events and give rise to new vulnerabilities with the differential spatial and socio-economic impacts on communities. The unprecedented increase is expected to have several impacts on the hydrological cycle, drinking water availability, forests, coastal wetlands and mangroves, food security, health and other related areas. The impact would be particularly disastrous for developing countries including India and further degrade the resilience of poor and vulnerable communities. Reason for concern. The impact of global climate change felt due to changes in weather and the observed change in surface temperature and the consequent increase in evaporation leading to extreme events like intense cyclones and flash floods is a significant environmental challenge. Extreme rainfall has substantially increased over large areas, particularly over the west coast and west central India. Observations during the last decade and projections indicate that extreme events, that is, heat waves, cold waves, floods, and droughts, would increase. There is thus an urgent need for a paradigm shift in disaster management, especially because of changing climate. Did you know World Bank says India will lose 2.8% GDP due to climate change by 2050? Poverty and disaster vulnerability. Poverty and vulnerability to disasters are inextricably linked and mutually reinforcing. The poor section of the society is the worst affected in the case of a disaster. The situation further aggravates as the poor depend upon environmental resources for their survival, increasing their vulnerability. It compels them to migrate to more vulnerable locations and take refuge in unsafe shelters. Their dwellings are of low cost, makeshifts, and are easy targets for various hazards. These habitations are chosen either due to the fact that there is no other land available at a reasonable cost or due to their proximity to employment opportunities. These disasters hurt the people and vulnerable the most, and natural disasters have had large and long lasting impacts on poverty. The better off population have the capacity to recover soon, and they are also seldom hit by disasters because they live in safer areas and their houses are built with stronger materials. Cause and effects of a disaster. Vulnerability is defined as the extent to which community services in a geographical area is likely to be disrupted by the impact of a particular hazard. As a developing nation with limited resources and still millions suffering from poverty, India is vulnerable to extreme weather events. For example, an earthquake of 6.9 Richter scale in Gujarat caused more than 13,000 deaths and 9,17,158 houses were damaged, while earthquakes of similar intensities in the USA or Japan have had relatively little impact. The magnitude of the loss of lives and livelihood opportunities in our country due to disasters is excessive by any modern standard. With more than 70% of India's population relying on agriculture directly or indirectly, monsoon failure or break in monsoon has a significant impact on the livelihood of farmers. Protracted problems lead to farmer suicides. Crops submerged by deluge affects production, leading to inflation and the necessity of having to import food grains from other countries. The varying nature of different hazards has different effects. For example, in the case of slow onset of a drought, it is difficult to demarcate the time of its onset and its end, and unlike other disasters, it does not cause structural damage, but it gradually intensifies poverty, reduces quality of life, and creates social unrest, all of which necessitates migration to greener pastures, with men migrating more than women. It also brings about demographic change. Economic costs. All natural disasters. According to this graph, source Our World in Data, 2010 has the 350 billion plus. While wealth and property can be earned back, the loss of family and friends leads to post-traumatic disorders. If not taken care of, it leads to depression, substance abuse, etc. So, psychological aspects of disaster should be given due attention. What is disaster management? Disaster Management Act 2005 defines disaster management as a continuous and integrated process of planning, organizing, coordinating, and implementing measures which are necessary or expedient for the following: prevention of danger or threat of any disaster, mitigation or reduction of risk of any disaster or its severity or consequences, capacity building, preparedness to deal with any disaster, prompt response to any threatening disaster situations or disaster, assessing the severity or magnitude of effects of any disaster, evacuation, rescue and relief, and rehabilitation and reconstruction. The National Disaster Management Plan (NDMP) provides a framework and direction to the government agencies for disaster management. The NDMP is consistent with the approaches promoted globally by the United Nations, in particular the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015 to 30. Conclusion: a series of catastrophes across the world in recent times has served as a reminder for disaster risk reduction. As we understand, there are no disasters, only natural hazards. It is time for us to put concentrate and profound effort to understand various hazards, its risk, and their mitigation strategy to our common future. Thank you.